All right, let's jump right in. We're talking about Chikungunya virus. For a long time, this was seen as a regional pathogen. But now, it's a re-emerging global threat, causing these massive, explosive outbreaks and a whole lot of long-term misery. And for us, right here in the Netherlands, it's really the classic example of an imported disease, and that brings some pretty unique challenges for diagnosis and management, especially in our returning travelers.
Now, just so you know where all this is coming from, this briefing was put together specifically for you, for Dutch medical microbiologists. We used Gemini Deep Search to pull together all the latest literature and guidelines. And hey, we believe in showing our work, so you can find a complete detailed list of every single source in the linked Notebook LM document.
The name of the virus pretty much tells you the most important thing you need to know about what it does to people. Chikungunya. It comes from the Chimicandri language, and it literally means that which bends up. What a perfect description, right? It just paints this vivid picture of patients completely contorted by that severe, incapacitating joint pain. And that pain, well, that's the absolute hallmark of this disease.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get to know the virus itself and how it went global. Then we'll dive into the clinical picture and, of course, how we confirm it in the lab. After that, we're going to get really specific on the Dutch management guidelines before we wrap up with prevention and a look at what's coming down the pike.
Okay, first up, a re-emerging global arthrogenogen. We're going to look at how this virus went from being a relatively contained problem to a worldwide headache. And it's all thanks to a really tiny evolutionary tweak that had absolutely massive consequences.
Let's get the basic virology out of the way, just for context. Chikungunya virus is part of the Togaviridae family in the alphavirus genus. We're looking at a pretty small enveloped particle with a positive sense single-stranded RNA genome. And genetically, it's split into 3 main genotypes that, for a long time, stayed in their own parts of the world. But, as we'll see, that all changed.
The global spread of Chikungunya virus wasn't just bad luck. No, it was supercharged by one single pivotal event, a point mutation, A226V, in its E1 envelope glycoprotein. This one tiny little change gave the virus a massive advantage. Why? Because it suddenly allowed it to use a brand new ride, the Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus. And since that mosquito loves temperate climates, this mutation basically unlocked the door to Europe and North America for the virus. It's a brilliant and honestly a kind of terrifying example of viral evolution in real time.
So how does this actually look when a patient walks through the door? For us, the biggest challenge is telling it apart from its notorious cousins, Dengue and Zika, especially when you've got a traveler who just got off a plane from the tropics.
So let's put ourselves right in that situation. You've got a patient in front of you. They have a high fever, a rash, and they can barely move because their joints are on fire. Right away, all 3 of those big arboviruses, Chikungunya, Dengue, and Zika, have to be on your list. So how do you start to tease them apart, just based on the clinical picture, before you even get to lab results back?
When you look at the key differences, the one thing that should scream Chikungunya virus is the severity of the arthralgia. It is the defining feature. Sure, dengue can cause joint pain, but with dengue, you should really be looking for that profound thrombocytopenia and any hemorrhagic signs. Zika, on the other hand, is usually a bit milder, but is much more likely to come with conjunctivitis. And this is critical. Look at the chronic sequelae. That persistent, debilitating arthritis is the long-term signature of chikungunya.
And let me tell you, that chronic phase is no small thing. We're talking about a staggering 30 to 40% of patients who will go on to develop chronic polyarthralgia. And this isn't something that lasts for a week or two. It can go on for months, sometimes even years. This is what really defines the burden of this disease, long-term disability and a massive socioeconomic impact.
Okay, so you have your clinical suspicion. Now we move into our domain, confirming the diagnosis in the lab. And this is all about getting the workflow right, because with this virus, trust me, timing is everything.
The diagnostic strategy here follows a really clear 2-phase timeline. Think of it like this. In the first week, when the patient is in that acute viremic phase, the only way you're going to find the virus is by looking for it directly. Your method of choice is a real-time RT-PCR on serum or plasma. Simple as that. But after about day 7, that viremia just drops off a cliff. And starting around day 4, the immune response starts to kick in, and our diagnostic focus has to shift completely over to serology, hunting for those first-wave IgM antibodies.
So here's the playbook for the lab. In that first week, you should absolutely be using a multiplex RT-PCR to test for chikungunya, dengue, and Zika all at once. After that first week, you switch gears to an IgM ELISA. And remember, because you can get cross-reactivity with other alpha viruses, any positive IgM should ideally be confirmed with the gold standard, a plaque reduction neutralization test. Now, we rarely use viral culture for primary diagnosis, but it's still vital for research. The virus grows really well in cell lines like Vero and C6/36, and you see clear cytopathic effects. And one last really important point. We need to be sequencing our positive samples. This virus mutates, and that kind of ongoing surveillance is the only way we can be sure our primers and probes will keep working.
All right, let's talk about patient management, and we're going to focus specifically on the Dutch guidelines, because our approach is particularly cautious and well-considered, with some really key differences from the broader international recommendations. Look, there is one golden rule here that you just cannot overstate. Paracetamol first. Always. You absolutely positively must rule out dengue virus infection before you even think about reaching for an NSAID like ibuprofen or diclofenac. It's non-negotiable. And this is especially true because management is entirely supportive. We have no licensed specific antiviral treatments for chikungunya virus, which means symptom control and, most importantly, avoiding harm is the whole game.
And this is where our Dutch LCI guideline offers some really specific, nuanced advice. While it lines up with international standards on most things, like supportive care, it takes a much harder line on corticosteroids. The LCI RICT line explicitly recommends avoiding corticosteroids during the acute phase of the illness. Why? Because there's a real concern about a potential rebound effect, where the symptoms could come roaring back even worse after you stop them. For clinicians here in the Netherlands, this is the standard of care. And for kids, the principles are exactly the same. Supportive care, focus on fever control with paracetamol, keep them hydrated, and that dengue first rule is just as critical.
Okay, let's wrap this up by looking at prevention and what the future might hold. This is really about how we protect our travelers today and how we prepare for the challenges of tomorrow.
Prevention for Dutch travelers based on the LCR guidance is pretty straightforward, but it definitely requires discipline. It all comes down to personal protection. Using a good repellent with DEED, covering up with clothing, and making sure your hotel or apartment is mosquito-proof. And the one piece of advice you really have to hammer home with people is that Aedes mosquitoes are day biters. Your protection can't stop just because the sun is still up.
And now we have a powerful new tool in the toolbox, vaccination. The live attenuated vaccine IXQ is available right here in the Netherlands, and it's recommended for travelers who are heading to areas with active outbreaks. But, and this is a really critical precaution from both the LCI and the European Medicines Agency, this specific vaccine should be avoided in anyone aged 65 and older. This is due to some reports of potentially serious adverse events in that age group.
So that leaves us with one final and, I think, pretty crucial question. We've got a warming climate that's making our country more and more hospitable to the Aedes albopictus vector. We've got established mosquito populations just across our borders, and we now have a licensed vaccine in our hands. When you put all of that together, you have to ask, how prepared are we really for the future of chikungunya virus in the Netherlands?
That's definitely something for all of us to think about. For the very latest on this and other emerging infectious diseases, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We really want this to be a conversation among professionals, so please share your own insights, your experiences, and your questions in the comments below.